Chapter 17. I sat bolt upright in bed, fighting the urge to scream out. It was just a dream, just a nightmare. My body shuddered, and I struggled to slow down my racing heart. It had seemed so real, so surreal. Those three thugs had been chasing me through the park, waving machetes at me, trying to cut off my limbs. And I ran to try and get away from them, but I couldn't lose them. And as I ran, there were bodies and blood, torn limbs piled like firewood. And there among the bodies was Jacob, whose soft brown eyes staring up at me, silently pleading with me for him to save him. But who was going to save me? And then there was Jacques, his words, his voice, the things he said to me. It was all so awful. Why had I gone to speak to him? Why hadn't I just left well enough alone? There was nothing for me to gain in knowing any of this. I was better off before. It wasn't like knowing changed anything. It didn't make anything better for anybody else. It just made it worse for me. There was no point in even pretending I was going to be able to go to sleep. I threw off the covers and climbed out of bed. I'd left my computer on, and the screensaver swirled out a pattern of light that led me across my room. I opened the door, and my way was now lit by the little nightlight glowing from downstairs. Quietly, so as not to disturb anybody, I went down the stairs. I started for the kitchen, stopped, and then turned around and went to the front door. I wanted to make sure it was locked. I jiggled the handle. It was locked. I headed back for the kitchen, flicking on the light. I opened the fridge and pulled out the milk pitcher. Can't sleep? I jumped in the air, spun around, and almost dropped the milk. It was Berta. I didn't mean to scare you, she said. I wasn't scared, just startled. This certainly hadn't made my heart beat any slower. I tried to be quiet. Did I wake you? You know me, I hear sounds even when there are no sounds. Would you like a glass of milk too? I asked, holding up the pitcher. Warm milk would be nice. Ugh. Warm chocolate milk, Berta said. She opened up a cupboard and pulled out a big container of hot chocolate. Well, that would be okay. She filled the kettle with water and put it on the stove while I grabbed 2 mugs and put them on the table. So what's stopping Carnio Mio from sleeping? Too many thoughts. What thoughts? About people, about the way people treat each other. Most people treat each other well, Berta said, and others treat them like they're nothing, less than nothing. That's an evil. Evil is a strong word. What other word would you use to describe the Holocaust, the killing fields of Cambodia, the genocide in Rwanda? Those responsible for the disappeared in Guatemala, Berta said softly. I looked up at her. She had turned away. She was standing staring at the kettle, waiting for it to boil. Berta, I asked. She kept staring at the kettle. My friend the soldier, the homeless man, he said something to me about the disappeared. He said you'd know about them. I know. Again, the words were so soft. She was still looking away. Berta, you don't have to tell me anything. We can just have our hot chocolate. To be honest, I didn't know if I was trying to protect her or myself. The kettle started to whistle, and she took it off the burner. I put 2 heaping spoonfuls of the hot chocolate into each cup, and Berta poured in the boiling water. The tinkling of the spoons against the mugs was the only sound. Berta sat down at the table opposite me. The things I could say would not help either of us sleep, she said. I don't think I'm going to be sleeping much either way. Me neither. She dipped her spoon into her drink, blew on it, and sampled a little bit. There are things I don't talk about. You don't have to talk about it. I was feeling like I'd heard too much already. I don't have to talk. I don't want to talk. Maybe it is time I should talk. Maybe it is not too soon anymore. She blew on her hot chocolate. What do you know about Guatemala? I know some things. Of course, I know it's where you're from. It's in Central America. It's by the equator, and it's hot. It's poor. I know that you're supporting half the children in the country. Berta laughed. I'm helping to support 7 children. Berta had 7 foster children that she sponsored by making monthly donations to an orphanage in Guatemala. I knew my parents fairly well, but that was still a lot of money to send away every month. Not that she'd ever complain. I also knew if my parents did pay her more, she'd probably just support another child in the orphanage. Don't you also send them extra money all the time for other kids in the orphanage? I asked. Occasionally, Christmas, Easter, when they need some extra help. She took a sip from her hot chocolate. Your parents made a very generous contribution last Christmas. They did? I think they didn't want to make a big deal of it. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. I was a little surprised, but then again, what was a few dollars or even a few $1,000s to them? I wanted to change the subject, get it away from my parents. So with the extra donations, there was more than 7 children you take care of? More in some ways, she agreed, although I like to think I have 8 children. The 7 in Guatemala and 1 here. She reached across the table and patted my hand. I felt inside. I'll tell you some other things about my country that I don't talk about. For 36 years, my country was in a civil war. You know what that means? Of course, that's a war being fought by people within the same country. In a rich country, a civil war would be terrible, but in a poor country, it's devastating. People who had so little to begin with end up with nothing. Villages destroyed, fields burned or abandoned. Those who were just barely surviving before couldn't survive anymore. Who was the fighting between? The government, which wanted to keep control and wealth away from the people, and those who wanted a say in running the country. Many of those were the people who lived on the land, the peasants, the natives. People fled from the conflict. Over 1 million people became refugees, fleeing their homes, fleeing the country, searching for a safe place. But there was hardly any safe places. I can't even imagine losing my home. It is better than losing your life. There were many, many deaths. It was thought that over 100,000 people were killed, disappeared. Disappeared? That's what Jacques called it. What does that even mean? She shrugged. Disappeared. The people were there at night, sleeping in their beds, but gone in the morning. Disappeared. That's when the death squads came, at night. That was how it was for Jacob. That is when they came to my house, Berta said softly. Your house? To my house, she said. The words had been just barely audible. She looked up at me. My father was a newspaper editor in Puerto Berrioso. He wrote things that he believed in. Those beliefs cost him his life, and the life of my brother and my mother. I listened intently, not believing my ears, not wanting to believe my ears. It was at night when they came. I was sleeping. I heard the noise, the screaming, the yelling, and I scrambled out of my bed and into my closet, the way my father had told me I should. He always told me that we had nothing to fear, but then he made me promise to go into the closet if I heard screaming. I hid underneath blankets and clothing on the floor of the closet. They looked. I heard the heavy boots stomping into my room, heard the furniture being overturned, heard the door of the closet being opened, but somehow, like a miracle, like God was protecting me, they did not see me. I pictured it all in my mind. I could see it so clearly. It was like with Jacob, except they didn't find Berta. Thank God they hadn't found her. I lay there beneath the clothing, trembling, terrified, afraid to breathe or move. I lay there long after the noises had stopped and the voices had faded. I think I even fell asleep. I woke up and it was silent. I lay there for the longest time, listening, hardly daring to peek out from under the blankets. Then I saw a crack of light coming from under the door, and I knew it was morning. I came out, afraid to even call out, afraid that somebody might hear me, but more afraid that when I called there would be nobody to hear me. My room was torn to pieces. Dolls that my grandmother had given me were smashed. The night table overturned, the bed where I'd been to sleep, the mattress was slashed open with the stuffing bleeding out. That was what the whole house looked like. Nothing taken, just smashed and destroyed, left behind for anybody to see as a warning of what could happen. And of course my family was gone, disappeared. She paused and looked directly up at me. I expected to see tears, upset, anguish. Her face was a mask of calm. That was even more upsetting to me than if there'd been tears. I never saw my family again, never even knew where they'd gone or how they had died, but knew that they would never return. I didn't know, I said, the words barely able to form in my mouth. I never told you. I never even told your parents. How old were you? The age you were going to be, 16. And if those men had found you? I would have known the fate of my family. It would have been mine fate too. I would have been killed, tortured, raped, then tortured, raped, then killed. That's when I knew I had to leave before they came back. Where did you go? First to a neighbor, the place my father had told me to go. From there he brought me to a man who lived in our village. He arranged for me to escape, first to Mexico and then to Canada. My father had prepared it all, arranged it all. He knew what could happen. But if he knew, why didn't you all just leave before it happened? My mother tried many times to convince him that we needed to go. He thought because he was an editor, because of the influence his family had, that we would be safe. He said it was his country and he couldn't just abandon it. He had to try to make changes for the good of his country, for the good of his family. But it didn't do any good. In the long run, who knows, Berta said, the things he believed in, that he spoke out for, that he wrote about eventually became real. The death squads are gone now. But so is your family. Was it worth it? I could scarcely bear to ask her this, but I had to know. My father thought it was. Democracy is now alive in Guatemala. I just don't know how you could have gone on after what happened to your family. I don't think I could have been that strong. You would be surprised what you're capable of when you have no choice. Eon, you are strong, very strong. I don't know. I do, she said. She reached over and took my hand in hers. I know how strong you are. What is inside of you? I'm not that strong. No, does it take strength to go down to that place and help those poor street people? What I do is nothing. Not nothing to those people you help. Not nothing to me. You make me so proud. This was all so strange. She was telling me about the terrible deaths of her family, and she was the one comforting me. I guess I understand why it's so hard for you to get to sleep, I said. She nodded. Silly after all these years. They are still so vivid in my dreams, in my nightmares. She paused. Sometimes I think the only way to free myself from the thoughts is to go back home. Would that be safe? It is now. There would be nothing to fear. And you think going back would help? It could. Then why don't you try it? I asked. Not yet. What would you do? I'd be fine for a few weeks. I'm sure that it suddenly dawned on me that she wasn't talking about vacation. You mean to go there and live? She nodded. I felt my whole body go hot, then cold. But not now, someday. A wave of relief washed over me. Instead, I do what I can, she said. I send money in and I help in my small way. It's not a small way for those 7 children. It is like I've read. It is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. I have 7 candles that I keep alight. I reached out and took her other hand and held them both in mine. 8, I said.